A media executive who had spent 25 years building one of the most commercially successful television programs in American history, who at the peak of that program's run was reaching approximately 44 million viewers per week, who launched her own cable television network in January 2011 with enormous public anticipation and almost universal industry confidence that the launch would be commercially successful, spent the following 2 years watching that network lose money at a rate that multiple media industry analysts publicly described as a potential existential threat to the most recognizable personal brand in American media history. Her name was Oprah Winfrey. Born in 1954 in rural Mississippi in conditions of genuine material poverty, she has documented extensively in public accounts the specific severity of the early circumstances she experienced: poverty, abuse, adolescent pregnancy, before establishing herself in her early 20s as a television news anchor in Nashville and then Baltimore, and eventually as a local morning talk show host in Chicago in 1986, where The Oprah Winfrey Show debuted nationally and proceeded over the following 25 years to become both the longest-running daytime talk show in American television history and one of the most commercially lucrative television franchises ever built around a single personal brand. The specific business context of the Oprah Winfrey Network launch in 2011 matters for understanding what the network's early struggles actually represented. OWN was a joint venture between Winfrey's production company, Harpo Productions, and Discovery Communications, built on the specific premise that the personal brand equity Winfrey had accumulated over 25 years of The Oprah Winfrey Show could be translated into audience loyalty for a full cable network offering original programming across a broader range of formats and topics than a single daily talk show could contain. The concept was commercially plausible. Other talent-based media brands had successfully anchored cable networks, and the specific Discovery partnership provided OWN with distribution infrastructure and operational resources that Harpo alone could not have assembled. Morgan Housel has written that the specific challenge of translating personal brand equity built in one specific media context into commercial success in a structurally different media context is one of the most reliably difficult transitions in the entertainment and media industries, because the specific consumer relationship that generates personal brand equity in one context is built on a specific set of expectations, viewing habits, and emotional associations that do not automatically transfer to a different context, regardless of how strong the brand equity was in its original setting. The specific audience relationship Winfrey had built over 25 years of The Oprah Winfrey Show was built on a specific daily appointment viewing habit in a specific daytime programming context, and translating that relationship into discretionary cable viewing required rebuilding a different kind of audience behavior from a foundation that the existing brand equity could inspire but could not itself create. OWN's first 2 years were commercially difficult in ways that were publicly documented and publicly discussed with an unusual level of candor, partly because the network's difficulties were significant enough that Discovery's own financial results were materially affected by them. The network's ratings in its first year were substantially below what the joint venture's business plan had projected, advertising revenue lagged well below target, and multiple senior executives departed the network within its first 18 months. Winfrey herself gave a widely discussed interview in which she described the experience of watching OWN struggle as among the most personally and professionally difficult of her life, a specific admission from a person with her public profile of public vulnerability that itself reflected an unusual personal transparency. Benjamin Graham's investment philosophy emphasized that the specific value of any media business derives ultimately from a specific audience relationship, and that building a new audience relationship, even for the most well-resourced and most credentialed of operators, requires a specific and often extended period of trial, adjustment, and learning that cannot be shortcut by brand equity, distribution advantages, or any other structural resource that the operator brings to the venture. The specific difficulty OWN experienced in its first 2 years was not primarily evidence that the venture's underlying premise was wrong. It was evidence that the specific kind of audience relationship a cable network requires was genuinely different from the specific kind of audience relationship that had made Winfrey's personal brand so valuable in its original context. Daniel Kahneman's research into how people respond to specific large, public, and highly visible failures, particularly when those failures involve a domain in which the individual has previously achieved exceptional success, is directly relevant to understanding both the specific public and institutional dynamics of OWN's early struggles and Winfrey's specific personal response to them. Kahneman's work suggests that the specific experience of failing publicly in a domain where public success has previously been achieved produces a specific kind of reputational and psychological pressure that most people find extremely difficult to manage without either retreating from the failed endeavor or publicly minimizing its significance. Winfrey's specific response, remaining publicly involved with OWN, personally hosting a new original series on the network, and publicly describing the experience of the network's difficulty with unusual candor rather than retreat, represented a specific kind of public accountability that the available alternatives did not. The specific turning point in OWN's commercial performance came in 2012 and 2013, driven primarily by the specific success of a programming partnership with Tyler Perry, whose original series for OWN generated ratings that were meaningfully higher than anything the network had previously aired, and whose specific audience, predominantly Black women, a demographic that OWN's original programming had not specifically or effectively targeted, provided the network with a specific audience foundation from which subsequent programming could be developed. The network's advertising revenue and subscriber fees improved significantly following the Tyler Perry programming success, and by 2014 OWN had reached a level of consistent commercial viability that its first 2 years had not suggested was achievable. Robert Kiyosaki's core lesson about the specific importance of identifying and building toward the specific audience or customer whose genuine needs your product or service actually meets, rather than the audience you might have preferred to reach on the basis of your existing brand associations, applies directly to OWN's specific programming evolution. The specific programming approach that eventually stabilized OWN's commercial performance was, in important respects, different from the programming approach the network had originally been conceived around. That specific adjustment, acknowledging that the audience actually finding value in OWN's content was somewhat different from the audience the network's original business plan had assumed, was the specific learning that 2 years of publicly difficult commercial performance had made possible. Here's an honest complication worth including. The specific narrative of OWN's turnaround has sometimes been presented as though Winfrey's personal resilience and the eventual successful programming adjustments were the primary drivers of the network's survival. The specific role of Discovery Communications, which continued to fund the network's operations through its loss-making early period, providing both the financial resources and the operational infrastructure that made the network's continued existence possible while it was finding its audience, deserves a specific acknowledgement that purely personal brand-focused accounts of the OWN story tend to understate. The resilience was real. The institutional support that made sustaining that resilience commercially viable was also real, and specifically essential. George S. Clason's advice about the specific importance of learning from specific failures, treating them as specific expensive but valuable lessons in what does not work rather than as conclusions about what is possible, applies here in a way that Winfrey's own public statements about the OWN experience have reflected directly. She has described the specific 2-year period of OWN's difficulties as one of the most instructive experiences of her career, specifically in terms of what it forced her to learn about the difference between personal brand equity and genuine audience relationship, a distinction that, once learned in the way she learned it, could not subsequently be unlearned. This isn't a simple story about a great personal brand automatically producing great commercial results, or about resilience and public accountability automatically producing commercial turnarounds. The specific success OWN eventually achieved was the product of a specific combination of continued institutional financial support, a specific programming breakthrough that reached an audience the network had not originally targeted, and a specific set of operational adjustments informed by 2 years of expensive commercial experience. The personal resilience and public accountability were necessary but not sufficient conditions for the outcome that followed. So here's a question worth sitting with. In your own career or business, have you ever discovered that the specific audience or customer whose needs your product or service genuinely meets was meaningfully different from the audience you originally designed it for? And if so, how long did it take you to recognize that difference, and how difficult was it to make the specific adjustment the recognition required? Before you leave, I want to hear from you. Have you ever watched someone with genuinely exceptional credentials and genuinely strong personal brand equity fail publicly in a new context? And did that failure change your assessment of the specific limits of brand equity as a commercial asset? Read a few comments before you go. Some of the most practically grounded insights on this channel come from people who've thought carefully about exactly where the limits of personal brand equity actually lie. Next week, I'll pick one comment and send its author one of the books that inspired this channel. And if these stories help you think differently about money, you'll find a way to support future research in the description. Every contribution helps buy books, access research, and keep this content free for everyone. Remember this. Oprah Winfrey did not rescue OWN from 2 years of public commercial difficulty by doubling down on the programming approach that had made the Oprah Winfrey Show the most successful daytime talk show in American television history. She rescued it by publicly acknowledging that a different approach was needed, by remaining personally committed to the venture through a period when retreat would have been the path of least reputational resistance, and by being willing to find, through expensive experience, the specific audience whose genuine needs OWN's programming actually met.